So welcome back. I'm excited to dig into our next panel now, which explores the challenges of international talent flows. It's becoming evident that we're falling behind other leading urban regions throughout the world. We had, I think, a great head start for a while, but I think there's a sense now that we're falling a little bit behind. New York City, London, both those centers have made significant inroads in tackling the issue, and so we need to catch up. It's a truism that happens to be true, like lots of truisms, that Canada is made stronger by its immigrants. Our meritocratic, points-based immigration system is intended to ensure that those who come to this country are the best and the brightest in the world. And as we've heard on the last panel, it's done a pretty good job. But it's why new Canadians are more likely to have post-secondary degrees compared to those born here. And many of the people we welcome are doctors, engineers, programmers, and highly skilled professionals. Our immigration system is attracting more talent every year, and in 2021, as we've heard, Canada accepted more than 400,000 new immigrants. Never in the history of this country have we opened our doors to so many people, and that number is only projected to grow over the next number of years. All of this looks terrific on paper, but our system, as we've heard, certainly has its fair share of shortcomings, and it's stretched to the limit, for one thing, and we have a growing backlog of immigrant applications, and to substantially boost capacity, Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship Canada has been hiring 500 new immigration processing staff and is in the midst of digitizing its immigration processes. So that should make some significant difference. In the meantime, though, we're losing workers who have had to leave this country simply because they're permanent residents. We heard a bit again in the previous panel. Permanent residence applications haven't been processed on time. The Afghan-Ukraine refugee crises have made it more important than ever that our immigration system is agile and well-funded. All of this to say that we cannot take our immigration advantage for granted. If we want to keep attracting the best talent, we need to ensure our company is the best destination for work. And concurrently, we need to ensure that the talent we bring here stays here. But here's a problem. Soaring housing prices are scaring immigrants away. People who move here want to know that home ownership is an attainable option for them, but for many it just simply isn't. Immigrants finding themselves paying expensive rents that inhibit their capacity to save and which stops them from building wealth and moving ahead in life. As a result, many skilled immigrants find they can't afford to stay in the Toronto region. Instead, they end up joining an exodus of talent, finding good jobs in lower cost areas. This is a huge issue in our tech sector. 60% of Ryerson software engineers leave for the US, for example. U of T and UW may not be that much different. Getting a handle on this housing affordability problem before it undermines our economic potential is increasingly urgent. We also need to better integrate international students studying at our universities so they see a future here among us. A major step towards forward is the Ontario government's efforts to fast-track permanent residence for international students. Before we continue, I invite you all to answer our next poll. For those joining us virtually, as before, you can access the poll by clicking on the Q&A and polling tab on your screen. And for those of you joining us here, instructions on how to answer the poll, as always, are on your table. The poll asks, what do you see as the top challenge to attracting and retaining talent in the Toronto region? I'll be sharing the results at the end of the session. Now, to help us navigate this conversation, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Vivek Goel, the President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Waterloo. Vivek is a distinguished scholar and has been recognized around the world as a leading public health researcher and health services evaluation expert. Please give Dr. Goel a round of applause today. Thank you.
Thanks, Giles, for the introduction. And like many people, I'm glad to be here in person, but I'm really glad to not be talking about public health or COVID today. But as we've seen, it's actually difficult to talk about the transformation of work and workforces without talking about the global pandemic, and we've already heard about this. It's been preoccupying us. It's exposed deep societal challenges and has accelerated many transformations that were already underway. We've talked already about the rapid shift to remote working, the challenges of recruiting top talent, evolving workplace expectations, and the critical calls for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're all rethinking the world of work. Organizations have to embrace a new talent imperative if they hope to succeed in the post-pandemic economy. We've heard from the previous panel about the incredible opportunities that we now have for post-secondary education and industry to work together to ensure we're equipping talent to reshape our local and global recovery. I'm going to recap 3 main ways in which post-secondary education can help address the gaps: by producing new talent, our students, reskilling and upskilling existing talent, your employees, and helping bring new talent into the country, our international students who become immigrants. One of the most important connections we've already talked about between higher education and industry is through work-integrated learning programs. As we heard from my colleague Maria Gertler, the Business and Higher Education Roundtable recently reported that work-integrated learning remains the gold standard to develop, recruit, and transition new grads into the workplace. As a pioneer of cooperative education, and this speaks to my little interchange with my good friend Chris Yip, U of T is not yet doing co-op education. Scarborough's getting there, but Waterloo is the pioneer in co-op education. Our university was founded to be unconventional. Co-op education has been key for our success. We are the largest co-op institution in the world, with as many students as the next 4 institutions in the world combined in co-op programs. So it's going to take a while for U of T to catch up. Thanks. As we've talked about, the digital transformation has been accelerated, and employers are looking to increasingly hire and recruit remotely. Our co-op education program has had a front seat window on that transformation. Over the last 2 years, our co-op students have been working remotely in hybrid formats and every format in between. And we're seeing what the impacts are on our students and on those workplaces. We have used our rich data set of work term postings to identify the key skills that employers are looking for and have developed our future-ready talent framework. It's now informing how we do our evaluations, our consultations with employers, development of professional development courses, and career workshops for our students. As a result, our students are much better prepared for the changing nature of work. In order to improve the readiness of our students, we recently launched the We Accelerate program, working directly with industry partners to build a curriculum specifically for first-year, first work term students. They work through a curriculum developed with employers to ensure they're ready for their work terms. And we're also partnering with different organizations to develop new forms of co-op education for the evolving workplace, working with small and medium enterprises, with not-for-profits, thinking about what a co-op work term will look like in a gig employment setting. We're developing graduate work-integrated learning, and we've pioneered e-co-op to support our students who are becoming entrepreneurs. Of note, 1 in 5 tech founders in Canada are graduates of the University of Waterloo, and I'm pleased that there's several in the room with us today. We're also strengthening not just the field-specific skills, but what we refer to as transferable skills. We talked about soft skills and other terms. While expanding field-specific knowledge is critical for success, especially as technology becomes smarter, we also need to ensure that our graduates have those other transferable skills. For example, technological agility, which is necessary for everyone to remain competitive. And regardless of discipline, university students benefit from broad humanist training that helps them understand how education relates to broader society. And particularly vital, given recent events, a broad university education that includes the liberal arts helps shape our graduates to be good global citizens who we need as future defenders of democracy. We can also work together on supporting learners throughout the talent lifecycle. Lifelong learning has become more important as workers need to reskill and reimagine their careers in light of the transformational forces that we've been talking about. We've been doing well at supporting work-integrated learning. We're now looking to expand our work with our industry partners to support learning-integrated work. We've launched our WattSpeed initiative to work with external partners to create programs to help professionals keep pace with emerging technologies and understand their impact on businesses, economies, the environment, and society. As we've heard, one of our country's most potent economic and societal forces is the international students moving here to access some of the best universities in the world. This region in particular attracts a large number of these students. We also attract new and established professionals looking to work in a growing innovation ecosystem. But as we've also heard, the rest of the world is not standing still. Just today, in Times Higher Education, there was an article about how countries around the world are looking at Canada's postgraduate work system as a model for them to adopt, including the United States. And this article predicts this will be a major issue as the next election approaches there. So the point that Jack was just making about the opportunity and the wave that we caught in 2015, 2016, we could be on the other end of it if we don't constantly continue to innovate and differentiate ourselves. And so as we continue to bring in talent from around the world, adding rich cultural diversity to our communities, we have to also work on how we're going to retain that talent. And an important part of this work will include ensuring we are an inclusive and inviting community for all. And that's something that we in Canada and in this region in particular can lay a claim to that few other parts of the world can do. These are complex issues that we have to work on together. There's much to learn and discuss. I invite you to join us on April 14th at the Waterloo Innovation Summit, where we'll take a deep dive into these issues. I'm looking forward to the next panel, which will further unpack the strengths of the region and explore how to address some of the challenges we face to ensure we remain an attractive place to live and work. I'd now like to pass the mic off to Murad Hamadi, who works for The Logic as their Ottawa correspondent. Before working for The Logic, Murad covered politics and wrote a daily newsletter for Maclean's. Please welcome Murad.
Thank you, Dr. Gohl. Before I introduce our panelists today, who I know you're actually here to hear from, I wanted to set the scene for our discussion. The Toronto region has long been a major landing spot for people from around the world coming to Canada. A few decades ago, they might have found their first homes a little west of where we're sitting now, in Parkdale. Now it's probably Brampton or Mississauga, or further afield, communities like East Gwillimbury or New Tecumseh, which I promise you are just names I had to look up, but are the fastest growing communities in the GTA according to the latest census. But as you all know, real estate is sort of our national obsession in Canada. And rising housing prices are risking shutting out new arrivals and plenty of the existing population who want to live in this region. And that's before we get to other living costs. It would be remiss of me not to note yesterday's announcement, which made Ontario the 13th and final province or territory to sign a childcare deal with the federal government. And the promise is 10-a-day childcare by this time in 2026. So that's one major cost. Meanwhile, the pandemic has shown that a lot of knowledge workers and professionals can do their jobs in their spare bedrooms, wherever those spare bedrooms happen to be. We've seen those kind of workers leaving city centers for the suburbs or even other cities. Will they come back as offices reopen? I imagine that some of the offices around us in this part of town are filling up again, but it's not clear that everyone will want to be back in the office. And if they don't, will fewer people move to this region to work? Will local employers still have any kind of home field advantage if workers don't have to be located next to the office to get into work every day? At the same time, lots of immigrants still end up in low-wage work because their credentials or skills or experience aren't recognized by employers. And the pandemic has also made that low-wage work more precarious for lots of people, whether they are newcomers or were born here. Then there are international students, many of whom want to stay in Canada long-term after they're done with school. Are there pathways and immigration programs to allow them to do that? At the same time, as we're finally starting to see policymakers, and frankly, my own colleagues in the media, pay more attention to the ways in which some educational institutions and agents are taking advantage of people who want an education in Canada, but failing to deliver that education or proper supports. Are our educational institutions sufficiently supporting international students who are coming here? I just want to sort of put together the overall picture here. Last year, 108,000 people net left Ontario for other parts of the country. Usually that flow is the other way around. Now, the province ended up on the positive side of the ledger because of immigration, 198,500 new immigrants to the region. But the question is, will that continue? And fortunately, I don't have to answer it, but the people coming up on stage do. So first, we have Goldie Hyder. Goldie is the president and CEO of the Business Council of Canada. Next, we have Sabine Hirji, who's an executive advisor on the future of work at Deloitte. And finally, we have Matthew Lombardi, the managing director of 111. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage. All right, thank you all so much for being here with me. So we're going to dive right into this. The mean price for a house or condo in this region in February was $1.33 million. $1.33 million. That's up 28% year over year, according to Toronto Regional Real Estate Board. In Durham, Peel, and York, the increases were 40% or higher. So I want to start with you, Goldie, because I know housing policy is an area that you've shown some interest in. How significantly is the cost of housing affecting the desire of people to move to this region or stay here? And what should governments and employers be doing about it?
How much time do we have? Look, the short answer is supply, right? It's a very simple answer, but it's complicated to solve the problem. It's a zoning issue, for starters, which means it's a very municipal issue. You have NIMBYism going on in all kinds of places who says you can do it, whatever the housing issues are, but just not in my neighborhood, do it somewhere else. So you get further and further and further out. That creates new problems because we have poor, with all due respect, we have a maturing transportation sector, let's call it. I know there's a lot of money going into it, but if you compare us to Europe and Asia and other places, it's not as robust as it needs to be to have people live a long ways from home. And it's a density issue, ultimately. We need to go up, if that's the case. Even though we live in the second largest landmass in the world, on Earth here, we're going to have to go up instead of going out, because without those other pieces coming together, it's a problem. Now, there's all kinds of complications here, right? We're talking about foreign investors and all that other things, which I think policy can address. See Vancouver with the foreign tax and those kinds of things are mechanisms that we can use. But the other thing that's going on here, and I'm sure we're going to dive into that much more, is the backdrop of this return to work. Where do people really need to be? Do I have to be downtown? All of that stuff, to me, is a real live experiment. And I think, with great respect to a lot of people, they're getting a little too far ahead of themselves about just how much change is actually going to happen. And so I wouldn't mind talking more about that and less about housing, because I don't know what to do about housing except what I just said.
Matthew, I know cost of living is a major issue that you're thinking a lot about. How is that affecting the companies you're working with?
Sure. Well, first of all, we're going to take you to East Gwillimbury at the first available opportunity. But jokes aside, I think that, Giles Gerson said it earlier, on the retention side, right, there's a stat around something around 65% of, Ryerson software engineering grads choosing to take jobs in the US. So that's on the retention side. And I think it's 30% of STEM grads as well, Giles. But on the attraction side, there was a stat yesterday, a survey came out that said 30% of new economic immigrants under the age of 33 are considering leaving in the next 2 years. That should be a red warning light indicator on both the attraction and retention side for young people, not just young people working in tech, but in all sectors. And that's strictly because of cost of living, specifically housing. The salaries have not kept up with the way that housing costs have gone up. And people want to be able to come here and make a life for themselves. I think that when young workers start to leave, when Goldie talks about what's coming back to the downtown, and he's sort of alluding to how we rebuild the city, when young people start to leave, you're starting to hollow out the culture of a city. You're starting to hollow out the ability for fun new restaurants and clubs and all the things that make a city, right? The fabric of it. The federal government did an amazing job with the Canada Startup Visa. It was a home run, but if a third of those people are considering leaving, then we haven't gotten all the way there yet.
And so let's talk a little bit about that return to work word. Sabine, I know you've been posting on LinkedIn. I've been seeing a lot about the Great Resignation and the way that people are approaching their jobs. Now, Goldie said let's not get ahead of ourselves. But let's get a little bit ahead of ourselves here. Can the region continue to attract top talent if they no longer need to, physically be coming into like this part of town in particular? And will employers still be able to hire the best local talent if, now they're competing with employers from kind of everywhere?
It's the most talked about issue, of course. And
Housing.
after housing, yeah, but I'm not doing housing. So I would, the short answer is yes. And the long answer is yes, if. And it's the if that we really need to talk about. Just in terms of a little bit of context, and I know you've covered it off earlier, but just over 2 years ago was really when we started this biggest workplace experiment. Virtually overnight, 40% of people started to work from home. If 2 days prior to that, someone had said that to me, I would have said, what are you talking about? You're nuts. And we're still learning. So the positive element there that I want to touch on is we really demonstrated to, as employers and as individuals, how adaptable people really are. We are able to change on a dime. We came together really in common purpose. It was about lives, it was about livelihoods, and we did everything we possibly could to make that work. So when I think about it going into the future and where are we going to land, there's no one size fits all. There's a lot of research has been done, a lot of surveys, and generally you see 30, 50, 20. 30% of people want to work remotely most of the time, 50% want to be in a hybrid environment, and 20% want to be mostly in the office. And this is not the final destination. This is the next normal. And this is where the if really comes into play. We need to understand why people want to work mostly from home. It's not just the commute. Of course, the commute's a great thing. And I think earlier on, the minister said, wearing your pajamas in the bottom and putting your jacket on, and the odd parliamentarian who forgot to wear his pajamas too. But we won't go there. But we haven't landed there. And so what employers do to really, there's two things. It's what employers do and what everyone does. On the employer side, it's really around creating a workplace or a future of work that's human. This is what we discovered through the pandemic. The power of humanity, the power of connecting with people, and we figured out, and remember, only 40% of people were working from home, 60% of people were actually going into work so that we could be taken care of, because many of us are probably office workers. And so for me, you asked the question on the Great Resignation, why are people leaving? And really, there's a bit of catch-up. People didn't move in 2020. There was very little movement. So a little bit of that you can say is catch-up. But it's really the great reset. People are rethinking, what is the role of work in my life? I'm not living just to work. Work is important, life is important, family is important. I remember one young male executive saying, I have two young children, and I realized being home for the last 2 years how much I missed with my first child. And I don't want to miss out on that anymore. So I want flexibility, I want choice, and I want autonomy. So in terms of where we land with where people work, we are going to have to really bring employees into that conversation. We're going to have transparent discussions with them. We're going to have to acknowledge what they're giving up by not working from home. I see some organizations, because if they're bringing people back, they're only talking about the great things about being back. There is a trade-off, but if you create environments where people feel valued, where there's really this sense of belonging, I think Rola talked about it this morning in the panel that you were on as well, Susan. What are we doing around that? It's about purpose and meaning in terms of being at work where you can really make a difference to community.
I think Matthew wants in.
Yeah, I'd love to, just to build on Zavin's point here, that great experiment where overnight 40% of people went home and started working from home. A lot of reasons for that, not just COVID related, but part of this is workers have done their part to sort of put a Band-Aid on the mismatch between cost of living and salaries. So two things have happened, and we've seen this over and over. One, workers have said, thanks very much, and migrated out of the city to give themselves a functional raise by lowering their cost of living. And so that was of net benefit to a lot of workers who were able to work remotely. And number two, a lot of tech workers especially have taken jobs with sort of bigger US tech companies that pay sort of top of the band, right? And so that puts them on an almost US salary trajectory, but get to stay in Toronto or the GTA. These are not good Band-Aid solutions to the problem, because all you're doing is impeding the labor force, and you're making the problem worse, kicking the can down the road. So I think a lot of the new normal, we're going to have to sort of grapple with some of the sort of Band-Aids that we put on it and adapting to that.
Goldie?
So I think panels are fun when there's a contrarian view. So I'm going to take some of the contrarian views. First of all, if the old saying goes, if you want to know what the future looks like, take a look at the past. We had a pandemic that killed 50 million people. In a matter of 4 years, never was a vaccine. Since then, we've made cruise ships, airplanes, subways, helicopters, high-rises, densified. You would have thought we would have all been farmers, right? Human nature goes one way and another way, and over a period of time, it gradually finds the center again. Second point, what we're talking about here is largely a North American phenomena. This is not taking place in Asia and Europe, and there are reasons for that. We live in pretty large footprints in our homes. Right? Compared to being in Paris or in Tokyo or in Mumbai or places, you have a much larger footprint in your homes. You have a lot more comfort. I've been home with 4 people working. Okay? We've managed to work somehow in a home. Secondly, we have really good broadband. Not perfect around the whole country, but we actually have pretty good infrastructure thanks to our telco companies and others who made all those investments despite sometimes having some pretty punitive and restrictive policies from government, which is an indirect shot, but a shot nonetheless. The third thing I would point to is, with all due respect again to all the investments that are made in transportation, it's pretty mediocre in North America, particularly in Canada. I mean, I grew up in Calgary, where we heard about high-speed rail between Calgary and Edmonton for all 45 years that I've been here. And the only thing that's happened since then is the airport has moved further from Edmonton, out of Edmonton. I'm only making it worse to be able to get there, right? So we don't have high-speed rail. We don't have the infrastructure that they do from a transportation perspective. Our roads are the same situation. So that's a discouragement for getting to work, and so you find alternate ways of doing that. For the longest time, we didn't have childcare, which didn't enable people to be able to participate in the workforce. So there's a lot of policy issues here that I think we need to be careful of. Thirdly, rule in crisis is, so my master's thesis was actually on policy making in times of crises, and it concluded 2 things. One is, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't make policy in times of crisis. Don't make operational changes in times of crisis. Always hedge. Asterisk, during this time, as things evolve, while this is going on, never commit during a crisis, because you're going to wake up one day and you're going to wonder, why the hell is everybody home on Fridays? Right? And then you'll realize, oh yeah, back 7 years ago when we had that pandemic thing, we made that change. Because once you give it, it's like a wage increase, right? Once you give it, it'll be really hard for you to take it back. Okay? So be careful when you do that. And the second thing is that the field is littered with people in crises who predict dramatic change. Things will never be the same. Life will never be the same. It'll all go different. And then somehow life ends up looking a lot like it did a little while ago. So most of our members are thinking, the question is it in 2 years? Is it in 3 years? Is it in 5 years? But life's going to look a lot more similar than I think we realize. Despite everything that we're discussing and all the technological innovations and all of those things, even now, from the 2-year period that I've tracked our members, which is 170 plus CEOs of the largest companies in the country, including AV at Deloitte, 2 million employees, it started out with, this is going to be great for productivity, number one. Number two, I'm giving away all my space. I don't need office space anymore, so my 2 best costs are going to be cut, right? I'm going to be able to figure out where I get my labor, because it ain't necessarily all going to be from home, right? Because if you can work for me in Markham and never come to me in downtown Toronto, I suppose you could be in Manila or Mumbai too. So be careful what you wish for in terms of some of that stuff. So employers are going through a process where they're trying to figure out, do I need to automate? Do I need to outsource? Do I need to relocate? How am I going to address this? So while all of us are excited about working from home, the employers are thinking about what's the long play here, right? So the game of checkers versus chess. What's the long play here? So things are going to change more than we realize for the short term, but in the long run, I'm not convinced they're going to look that much different.
So if I could just, since you
We started the debate here.
Good.
Now we got ourselves a panel, people.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't know that we are on 2 different sides. Even today, employees are saying only 30% say they want to work mostly from home. 70% say they want hybrid or they want to work in the office. So the difference between employees and employers is actually not that far apart.
You're the expert in this. Do you think that employers misunderstood what flexibility that people wanted and made it hybrid? Because nobody asked for hybrid. They all asked for flexibility, and we came up with hybrid.
So we came up with, because we were all remote and that's the only model we know. But it is flexibility, it is choice, and it is autonomy. People need to be able to make some of those choices themselves, figure it out, work with their teams. It's also about when people work as much as it is where people work. Who says you have to come into the office for 8 hours?
Get outcomes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Moving to the outcomes piece. But the other thing I want to bring into this is this is also where people are going to live. So how we work together across the sectors, we need to really ramp that up. We need leaders in business, in government, in academia, civil society, not-for-profits, to really commit and build this shared purpose of building a region that reaches its potential. Yeah, we're doing a great job a good job with diversity and inclusion. We have a lot more to do there. We can be the leader in that space. And for me, if we don't take that opportunity through this pandemic, there's a lot of moments that have been created. How do we turn some of these into movements and make this the best region in the world, because we have so many ingredients and people will want to actually live and play, not just work here. And we can't let this crisis go to waste.
I just want to take that sort of spirit of cooperation and flip it on its head. Just because we're switching gears a little today up here, which I like. So this morning, the Premier, who will be up here in a few moments, was announcing a deal or a new expansion. So Meta Platforms, which most of you will probably know as Facebook, is putting 2,500 engineering and other tech jobs in Canada, a lot of them in Toronto. And we've seen, Giles was talking about my apologies. Dr. Gertler was talking about this New York Times piece at slightly too great length for my liking as a journalist who works for a competing outlet, but I'll let that one go. About all of these big companies who are putting offices or hiring significantly here. And when I'm not doing this, I'm typically writing about Canadian startups and scale-ups. And Matthew, you work with a lot of these kinds of companies. Some of them are coming here with office space. Some of them are simply just hiring across the border. Is it as simple as Canadian companies need to match on salary? Is it just a numbers game now?
No, it's not just about salary. There are so many things that go into. There we go.
Yeah.
It's not just about salary. There are so many things that go into where someone makes a choice to work. purpose of the company, the mission, the vision, the values. Are they part of the founding team? Compensation comes in all forms, not just salary, equity, especially for earlier stage companies. But aside from the compensation piece, just at a higher level, I can tell you 100 examples of Canadian founders who are now running their own companies who started at Uber in Toronto, or started at Google in Toronto, or started at Facebook in Toronto. We need all of these companies to be here because they're helping to train a generation of next Canadian tech founders. So, when you look at, Young's here from Mars, you look at Mohammed Lakshmi and Ryerson, the co-ops at Waterloo, the American tech companies locating here, all of these things are part of creating a healthy ecosystem where a lot of companies thrive. So it's not quite that simple. And at the end of the day, over the long run, those companies being here will push salaries up across the board in tech.
I want to talk a little bit now about the people who are coming here from elsewhere. And so this is the point at which I do my disclosure. So I'm a former international student myself, and I chose actually U of T for two reasons. One, I couldn't afford to go to the States. And two, Canada has this postgrad work permit, which we've already had referenced, which allows you to stay for 3 years. But we are seeing, as Dr. Gold was referencing earlier, we are seeing other countries start to catch up. The US now, for most STEM fields, now offers 3 years. It's almost exactly the same, and they're expanding into other areas. So Sabine, I wanted to ask, are post-secondary institutions and employers doing enough to sort of help students while they're here, help them feel part of these communities, help them find the opportunities, and then keep them here long term, so that we don't have that sort of, we're training people and then losing them to other parts of the world?
I probably can speak more to the employer side. There are lots of post-secondary leaders here, although I've dabbled, I've been on the board of governors at U of T, was on for many years and sort of got a peripheral view there, but I think we can do better. The numbers are massive. Last year, there were 450,000 study permits issued. And when I think about employers, generally employers, and by the way, I'm the former CHRO of RBC, for those of you who may not know that. So I come really from that employer side. Employers don't really look at this international students as a different segment when it comes to employment, when it comes to co-ops or internships. What are different aspects that you want to add to that work experience that are unique to really being able to help international students integrate? Because everything is different for them. It's not just school that's different. Life is different. The climate is different. The food is different. The language is different. I came to Canada as a 14-year-old, and so did actually experience many of those things. But I had my family with me, whereas most of the students do not. And so how we create that wraparound support, what organizations can do around offering mentoring and support when the co-op students or the internship ends and they go back to school, so that there is that fuller integration. One of the other things, and this is something you may have seen, Goldie, but there was a recent report that TRIAC, the Toronto Regional Immigrant Employment Council, that I've been involved with since I guess almost 20 years. But one of the things they pointed out was that being in the office and that experience of work for new immigrants is critical to how well they integrate, not just economically and at work, but in society. And I think that's a really important element for us to be thinking about. So to your question, are we doing enough? Probably not, because it's a large number, and how do you scale it? I think that's really the conversation. And we're talking about large organizations. The majority of jobs are in SMEs. This is really hard for them to be able to assess, integrate, bring in international students into their workplace. So in terms of scale, I see this opportunity to really do things to be able to help them, because they're looking for one or two people, and the CEO is is the owner and the head of HR and everything else that they're doing at night. So how can we help on the international student side with that.
Goldie, let's take this beyond the international student piece. So we have, as several people have referenced today, we have lots of newcomers who end up here with skills or experience that isn't recognized. And we've seen efforts, Minister McNaughton was talking about some of them earlier, to bridge some of that gap. But are employers committed to this? Are they putting programs in place? How do we get those people into jobs that suit the work that they've done all their lives or the skills that they've acquired?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because in your introductory remarks there, you suggested that it was employers who couldn't keep those people employed. That's not the case. On the contrary, it's our professional bodies that are causing the problem with the recognition of those foreign skills. And so we've got to deal with that issue. It's largely a provincial issue. Every federal government says, I'm going to deal with it, and then they realize why they can't do it. It's a provincial issue for the most part. Maybe you can ask the Premier about that. But the Premier so the provincial governments and the professional bodies across this country have to deal with that. I mean, we had a pandemic going on, and the Nurses Association wouldn't let nurses practice. Like, we had a shortage of nurses. And so you can't complain at the same time that you had to work 18 hours while we had people who are qualified nurses that weren't able to get in. If they weren't qualified, let's get them qualified, right? So to your question about what employers can do, what we've been trying to do is, in some cases, they require Canadian experience. Right? So they get that Canadian experience without it being sanctioned as being a part of the professional body, but they're able to document that and say, I did X amount of work as an engineer or whatever the case might be, and I did it at an infrastructure company or an engineering company or whatever the case might be. So that's an example. It's to give them paid internships. Get them in the door, get them a chance to work so that, again, they're building up that CV that says, I've done it here, right? I know you're not acknowledging what I did in India or Africa or somewhere else, but I've done it here now, so can you acknowledge it? And by the way, there's a bit of arrogance to that. When you think about it, the world's changed. With globalization that's taken place, the professors that are teaching you here are teaching you there, right? And so we've got to look at this. And one of my messages on this issue is just the need to modernize our institutions and the way we think about it. I think I heard Vivek talk earlier about, what's being taught. I was on a call just before this at the Business Higher Education Roundtable, which is all about, sort of skills and reskilling and work-integrated learning and all of those things. And we were talking about how we know what we need from the skill sets as employers. Let's figure out how to make sure that our system going all the way back into secondary school is getting kids geared up to be in those programs, right? So some of that is a foreign issue, but some of it's also local. I think it's important to remind people that in order to maintain support for immigration, for foreign students, for refugees, and temporary foreign workers and all of that, we've got to make sure that the people who are in Canada already are being fully utilized in the capacity that they have, because it's underutilized talent that's actually a productivity issue in this country. So making sure people with disabilities, 750,000 people with disabilities in this country that are probably eligible to work and or underemployed, that we should look at. Indigenous people, 50% of them are below the age of 25. Let's get them the skills, let's get them into work. I've got members who call me on a regular basis that say, today, Goldie, I could hire 1,000 people and have them at work tomorrow morning. Right? 2,400 people at FedEx are looking. I mean, we've got massive job shortages. Surely to goodness we've got the people who are already here. And I can go on, right? Women who are underutilized, immigrants who are underutilized. If you want to maintain support for immigration, get all of those people that are here fully utilized, those who want to work, make sure they're eligible to work. And you know what you'll find? We're significantly short of talent and labor. And so it maintains the support for immigration and allows more and more people to come here. There will never be a shortage of people who want to come to Canada. What we've got to ask ourselves is it who we want and who we need? And are we doing the right recruitment to get those jobs filled in here? And you won't know that if you don't know how you utilize the people you already have here.
How the time flies when you're having fun. Matthew, I'll give you the last word on this.
I'll be quicker than the minute we have. Just to build on Goldie's point, I think we've all seen the stats. Immigrants are disproportionately entrepreneurial. They start a disproportionate number of businesses, tech and otherwise. Well, part of the reason is they're coming here, as Goldie said, they're finding their credentials are either not recognized, they're not properly valued, they're sort of pushed into entrepreneurship. So I think that's a really relevant point in terms of utilizing the folks that are actually already here.
All right. Well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have. And I could sit up here and talk about this with you for hours. I'll probably call some of you later to talk about it. But for now, the one thing I think really that we can all take away is the opportunity to look at kind of what's in our own backyard already and make better use of the talent we have and understand their capabilities. So that's, even as we bring people in who want that opportunity, as you said, there's no shortage of people who want to be here. So thank you all very much. And now Giles will join us again for some additional remarks before the premiere.
Thank you, Murad, for your expert moderation of the panel. It really was a lively panel, which was great for this moment of the day, I think, to get the juices flowing again. Goldie, Sabine, Matthew, thank you for joining us and for giving your perspectives on the battle for talent. Goldie, great to raise some, not just perhaps skepticism, but even red flags about jumping too quickly into the big reset or too many structural changes in case there is a rebalance back. One thing that I do think that this whole issue of brain gain versus brain drain is fundamental. Last fall, CBRE produced a study that showed Toronto was the fastest growing tech talent hub in North America with the largest net inflow of talent, which I think was interesting because we all think of brain drain. That's brain gain. On the other hand, we're losing a large number of highly skilled graduates, as we've heard from a number of our top universities. And as we just heard from Matthew, potentially 30% of newcomer software engineers thinking of leaving the province or the city. And so really there's that balance to consider, and I think it's an important topic. So with that, we conclude our final panel discussion of the day. Been a great day. Who would have thought that we could squeeze so much information about workforce development into such a short period of time? But I think we're all going to go back and talk to each other because there are lots of threads that need to be pursued. As you can see, when you have a compelling roster of expert speakers on your stage, anything is possible.